Hey guys, we're Group 9. I'm Braxton. I'm joined by Jake, Kate, and Anna, and today we're going to talk about one ethical dilemma in general, which is bribery. And before we talk a little bit more about bribery, we're going to talk about ethical dilemmas in general. Ethical dilemmas exist in every industry, every job, and they are much more common than people like to think or may realize. Learning about it in the classroom, you may not think it's going to happen to you ever or very often, and that's just a common misconception. Often people will betray their personal ethics in order to achieve personal gain. So, some examples of how this could happen: you could boost your sales numbers in order to receive a promotion. You could steal money on the job to pay for a personal expense, or use company time to complete a personal project. Those are all ethically wrong and happen very often. So our group today is going to talk about one in particular ethical dilemma, and that's bribery. We're going to talk about what it is, how it has happened in the real world, the legal ramifications of it, as well as best practices on how to prevent it. So the definition of bribery is to persuade someone to act in one's favor, either illegally or dishonestly, by gift or money or other inducement. So based on this definition, bribery could look like paying a client money in order for them to give you their business. That's illegal and dishonest, and that's one way to not get their business. And another way is also you could offer them front row seats to the Super Bowl or something like that as a gift in order to receive their business. That's also considered illegal and dishonest.
Bribery is more relevant than most of us probably think in projects. It's especially relevant with foreign projects because other countries do not have the strict laws that the US have. Especially, it's common with foreign oil and gas projects. And a large example of this was in 2009, where one of the world's largest engineering and construction firms, KBR, pleaded guilty to bribery with a Nigerian company to secure an oil and gas construction project. Their CEO personally pleaded guilty, and the company had to pay $402 million in fines, as well as $177 million to the SEC. Stanley, their CEO, was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. And although the US does not tolerate this, bribery is really common in other countries. And I reached out to someone who has spent over 30 years in the oil and gas industry, and they explained to me that the US is always at a major disadvantage by not being able to use this bribery because it's just so normal for other countries to secure their projects with bribery. And also, after a lot of research, I found that almost every case that was to public knowledge that I could find somehow involved a foreign country with an oil and gas project. So the US has major punishments for those who do get caught using bribery, as Jake will go over.
Now that we have a couple of examples of what bribery looks like within the project management context, let's take a look at some of the legal ramifications of bribery. First, at the federal level, we see that the Constitution defines bribery as occurring whenever a public official directly or indirectly corruptly demands, seeks, receives, or agrees to receive anything of personal value in exchange for a good or service from a non-governmental entity. And so within this statute, we see bribes as a payment with a future outcome that can only occur as a result of the actions from this government official. But this statute also includes what is defined as a gratuity, which is the effects or actions of the government official with a subsequent payment by, say, the company for that outcome. And so just going in and researching some of this stuff about bribery, I found that definition of gratuity seeming to be able to make the definition of bribery a little bit more well-rounded. And so for a company to be liable of this in court, the lawyers and the legal staff would need to be able to establish a link between the payment from the company or perpetrator and the action of the government official. Taking a look at the state and local level, we see that the laws are understandably a little bit more diverse. And as a result, corruption abounds a little bit more than it would, say, at the federal level. As far as corruption at an international scale, we see companies are covered by what is called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or the FCPA. And so an entity is liable for this if they have the intent to sway the governmental official to obtain or even retain their business. And so the payment wouldn't need to be directly with that government official. It could also be indirectly with a third party. And so when you're in a project that spans borders, it is important when you are contacting and contracting third parties that work in that local country to be sure that they don't bribe government officials, because at the end of the day, you might end up on the rope for the actions of that third party. And so some of the punishments include a fine that is ultimately double of what the economic benefit that you would expect to receive as a result of the bribe, and also even jail time for the perpetrators of the bribe. And so now that we have an idea of some of the legal effects of what bribery affects on the project, let's take a look at some of the best practices to prevent bribery within project management.
Communication across cultures can be difficult on a good day, let alone when talking about a controversial topic amongst different cultures, such as bribery. So what are some best practices that companies can implement among their employees to help fight the urge to fall prey to certain unethical situations, especially bribery? According to EY, there are 6 best practices that successful companies can implement among their companies. They own the problem. They communicate questions and demand answers. They make compliance real in a way that that employees can take ownership of their own actions. They communicate the risks and benefits of certain actions, and they focus resources on internal controls that protect their core competencies. So these are all great, but what are some more practical ways that we can prevent bribery specifically? According to skillscast.com, they listed 6 different prevention techniques. So the first one is to establish clear anti-bribery policies. So this could be in the form of a company's code of ethics, or I think even if it's enough of a problem, it could be discussed in a project charter if you're dealing with companies across seas and different cultures. The second prevention technique is to set the right tone from the top. So we've talked a lot about this and how it should be consistent across all forms of leadership, regardless of what division it's in or what geographic location it's in. The third prevention technique is to watch out for red flags. So areas of concern should be related to client services. So if a client is asking for services that weren't included in a project charter or maybe haven't been discussed and they're trying to keep them kind of under wraps, then that's obviously a red flag and should be communicated among the project team as well as maybe leadership in both companies. The fourth prevention technique is to make training meaningful. We discussed this actually in our project for Dessert Emporium. It needs to be tailored to your company because otherwise people won't take ownership of the training and they won't actually take it to heart. So it's important to help your employees see that they're an asset to the company and they should take ownership of their workings. The fifth is to encourage staff to report concerns. So employees need to be aware of whistleblower protection as well as how to use a whistleblower hotline. People will feel more comfortable using and reporting through this hotline if they actually know how to use it. And then finally, the sixth best practice is to conduct due diligence on all third parties. An easy way to do this is to implement IT or other controls so that they're more automated, maybe with a computer, as opposed to letting employees do it themselves. So these are just a few ways to combat the ethical dilemma of bribery, but there are some of the ones that we found to be most important.